Bring your why to life. Before anything meaningful happens in your life, something must wake you up, not politely, not gently, but forcefully, like a truth you can no longer ignore. Because there comes a moment when drifting is no longer an option, when surviving is no longer enough, when the gap between who you are and who you're meant to be becomes too painful to tolerate. That is the moment your why demands to breathe. Your why is not a slogan. It's not a mission statement on paper. It's a living force. It's the spark that turns ordinary people into builders, leaders, creators. The spark that turns a single day into a turning point. But a why that stays hidden is useless. A why that stays quiet becomes regret. Life isn't waiting. The world isn't waiting. Your potential isn't waiting. So the question is no longer do you have a why? The real question, the urgent one, is will you bring it to life before time makes the decision for you? Your why is a living thing. And the moment you treat it like an accessory instead of a necessity, it begins to wither. Men often silence their deeper purpose because the world has conditioned them to be providers, fixers, and problem solvers long before allowing them to be human beings with internal needs. A man's why doesn't disappear when he ignores it. It simply grows restless, showing up as frustration, distance, or an unexplainable heaviness that no achievement can fix. A living why requires attention, and men especially feel its hunger in the quiet moments, when the noise fades, when the roles pause, when nobody is watching. From a man's perspective, this why feels like a pulse under the surface, something that keeps tapping his shoulder, asking for courage instead of compliance. And yet, he often trades purpose for duty, clarity for busyness, authenticity for acceptance. He believes strength means silent endurance, not realizing that silence is often what starves his why the most. But a living why is equally visible from a woman's perspective because she sees the version of him he rarely sees in himself. She notices when his spark dims before he does. She feels when he disconnects from his own direction because his purpose isn't just his compass. It affects the relationship, the home, the energy of the entire environment. Women often recognize the hunger of a man's why long before he admits it's missing, observing the gap between who he is and who he could be if he stopped shrinking his inner voice. A living why demands expression, not perfection. And both men and women can sense when it's being ignored. When a man feeds his why through honesty, vulnerability, passion, or direction, he becomes grounded, present, and deeply alive. When he doesn't, the world still gets a version of him, just not the one he was meant to bring. Courage is the price of purpose, and men often underestimate how much of themselves they must be willing to confront before they can bring their why to life. The world teaches men to be fearless, but rarely teaches them to be honest. It celebrates their confidence, but ignores their doubts, praises their strength, but dismisses their fear. Yet purpose does not grow in the absence of fear. It grows in the presence of a man willing to step toward the very thing that scares him. True courage requires a man to face the parts of himself he has learned to bury, and this is where the internal battle becomes real. From a man's perspective, courage feels less like bold action and more like quiet rebellion, choosing vulnerability over emotional armor, choosing direction over distraction, choosing intention over impulse. He must be willing to stand up to his own hesitation, his old narratives, his fear of judgment, and the pressure to maintain a version of himself that no longer fits. He discovers that the hardest battles are not the ones outside of him, but the ones happening silently inside his chest. Women see courage differently because they observe the emotional gaps men often ignore. They notice when he retreats into himself, when he avoids his potential out of fear of failing, when he chooses comfort over growth even though he's capable of more. From a woman's perspective, a man's courage is not measured by how loudly he carries himself, but by how willing he is to show his truth. She recognizes the strength it takes for him to admit what he wants, what he feels, and what he fears losing. She sees that his purpose becomes real only when he stops hiding behind the expectations placed on him. Courage is the price of purpose because purpose demands exposure of one's heart, one's truth, and one's unmet potential. When a man chooses courage, even in small moments, he steps closer to the life he was meant to live, reducing the distance between who he is and who he is capable of becoming. Stop negotiating with yourself and start moving, because every moment you hesitate, your why loses momentum and your confidence quietly erodes. Men often live in a constant internal negotiation. Should I start now or wait? Should I take the risk or stay safe? Should I speak up or stay silent? This internal bargaining feels rational, but it's actually resistance disguised as logic. The longer a man debates his next move, the more he convinces himself that inaction is the safer choice, even when it's the very thing holding him back from the life he wants. A man's self-negotiation comes from the pressure to always appear in control, and that pressure creates a cycle of overthinking that steals progress. From a man's perspective, moving forward feels risky because movement exposes him to judgment, potential failure, and the possibility of discovering he's not as prepared as he hoped. So he stalls. He rewrites the plan. He waits for a perfect moment, a perfect mindset, a perfect version of himself that never arrives. The truth is, he's not negotiating with circumstances. He's negotiating with fear, and fear is undefeated when motion is absent. Women see this pattern clearly because they notice when a man talks about potential more than he takes steps toward it. From a woman's perspective, a man's hesitation isn't lack of ability. It's a battle between his desire and his doubt. She can sense when he holds himself back, when his ideas stay ideas, when his ambition stays internal instead of becoming action. She doesn't want perfection from him. She wants presence, movement, and commitment to his own growth. She knows that when he moves, even imperfectly, he becomes more confident, more grounded, and more connected to his purpose. The shift happens the moment a man stops negotiating with his fears and starts honoring his direction. Movement builds clarity. Movement creates confidence. Movement awakens purpose. When he finally acts, even in small steps, he stops postponing who he is meant to become and starts living the story he was meant to write, meaning beats motivation every single time, because motivation relies on how a man feels, while meaning relies on who he is. Motivation is loud, temporary, and unpredictable. It shows up when life feels exciting and disappears the moment challenges arise. But meaning is steady. It anchors a man in direction even when his energy is low or the path feels uncertain. Men often believe they need to feel inspired before they take action, not realizing that inspiration is the reward of movement, not the requirement. Meaning doesn't ask for emotion. It asks for commitment. A man's relationship with meaning is deeply tied to how he sees himself, and this is where internal psychology becomes powerful. From a man's perspective, meaning feels like an internal compass, a quiet but undeniable pull towards something purposeful. It doesn't hype him up, it grounds him. It gives weight to his actions, depth to his choices, and clarity to his direction. When a man acts from meaning rather than motivation, he is no longer chasing a feeling, he is following a truth, and that truth sustains him through setbacks, pressure, and doubt far more effectively than any motivational rush ever could. Women recognize this difference in men because they can feel when he is operating from purpose instead of impulse. From a woman's perspective, a man driven by meaning becomes consistent, present, and emotionally available because his actions aren't tied to his moods, they're tied to his values. She sees when he chases motivation instead of meaning, when he starts strong but loses steam, when he relies on emotion instead of intention. She knows that when he reconnects with meaning, he becomes steady, someone she can trust, someone he can trust, someone who moves with clarity even in difficult seasons. Meaning beats motivation because meaning doesn't vanish when life gets heavy. It keeps a man aligned when motivation fades, reminding him that his why is not powered by emotion but by purpose. When he leads with meaning, he no longer waits to feel ready. He simply chooses to stay aligned with the man he is becoming. Your future self is begging you to begin because every day you wait is a day he has to pay for. Men often underestimate how deeply time shapes their identity and how much regret is created not by wrong choices but by unmade ones. The man you will become is watching every hesitation, every excuse, every moment you convince yourself to stay comfortable. He's not judging you, he's pleading with you because he knows the cost. Inaction. And he knows how heavy it becomes to carry a life that could have been more. A man's future self becomes clearer the moment he stops running from his own potential. And this is where the psychological battle begins. From a man's perspective, the fear of starting is not actually fear of effort. It's fear of inadequacy. Starting means exposing himself to the possibility that he may fall short, that he may not be as ready as he hopes, that the world may not validate the dreams he keeps hidden. But the version of him years from now doesn't care about perfection. He cares about direction. He cares that the man he is today has the courage to give him something to build upon. Women see the future potential in men long before men see it in themselves. And that perspective creates a different kind of urgency. From a woman's viewpoint, a man's future self is not an abstract idea. It's the man she knows he is capable of becoming. She sees the strength he downplays, the possibilities he avoids, the talents he refuses to use. She feels when he drifts too far from his purpose, because his disconnection becomes visible in his presence, his energy, and even his confidence. She doesn't want him to wait for the perfect moment. She wants him to honor the man inside him who is ready now. The future self of a man becomes a powerful motivator when he realizes that time is not neutral. It compounds whatever he chooses. If he moves, time multiplies his growth. If he hesitates, time multiplies his regret. The man he will become is shaped by every small decision he makes today, every step he takes toward his why, every moment he chooses action over avoidance. And in that quiet internal space where his fear and purpose collide, his future self is whispering the same truth over and over again: begin now, because everything you want depends on it. If you don't define your impact, the woe. RLD will define it for you, because life never leaves a man unshaped. If he doesn't choose who he becomes whatever his environment demands. Men often underestimate how quietly the world assigns roles, expectations, and identities, and how easily they adapt to those roles simply to survive. Without a clear internal compass, a man becomes reactive instead of intentional, drifting into a version of himself that feels acceptable to others but unrecognizable to himself. Impact is never an accident. It is either designed by choice or dictated by pressure. A man's psychology is deeply influenced by the need to matter, and this is where defining impact becomes vital. From a man's perspective, the need for significance is not ego, it's wiring. He wants to feel that his actions create value, that his presence leaves an imprint, that his life contributes to something larger than routine. But when he lacks clarity on what impact means to him, he falls into patterns that feel productive but lead nowhere. He becomes busy instead of purposeful, responsible instead of fulfilled, and admired instead of understood. In that state, his impact becomes whatever others decide it should be, not what he truly wants it to be. Women notice this long before men do, because they see the disconnect between his potential and his direction. From a woman's perspective, a man without defined impact often looks lost, even when he appears successful. She sees him working hard but feeling empty, achieving goals but feeling unsatisfied, performing roles but feeling unseen. She senses when he has surrendered his why to external expectations, when his life becomes a reaction to pressure instead of an expression of purpose. She knows that his light dims, not from lack of ability, but from lack of alignment with the impact he's meant to create. The world is relentlessly loud in shaping men through culture, family, work, and unspoken demands. And if a man doesn't define his impact, he ends up living out someone else's story. When he begins to define it himself, something powerful happens. His actions start to carry weight because they're rooted in intention. His choices become clearer because they're guided by meaning. His presence becomes stronger because it reflects authenticity instead of performance. And both he and the people around him feel the shift from a man drifting through expectations to a man moving through life with conviction. A man's impact becomes undeniable the moment he stops waiting for permission and starts taking responsibility for the imprint he wants to leave. When he defines it, he steps into the role he was made for. When he doesn't, the world decides that role for him. And the cost of that surrender grows heavier with time.